This episode of the Old Dogs REI Network is brought to you by Mino Studio.
In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is a show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes, type in Old Dog, spelled D-A-W-G, find our podcast, and subscribe. Well, I am really stoked about today's guest. This is somebody who I discovered in my little wanderings through the podcast world. I came across her podcast, and it just is very addictive because she talks about stuff that applies to almost everybody in terms of personal finance, in areas of real estate investing, which got my ears there, and business in general, some really neat stuff. And so I am going to introduce you today to Paula Pant. And she is the host of the Afford Anything podcast. That's where I heard her first time. And she talks about real estate investing and financial independence. And she's also the founder of affordanything.com, which is an amazing website, blog, etc., etc. I mean, tons of great resources. But as a real estate investor, of course, that's what kind of brought me to invite her onto the show. She has owned, I think by the age of 31, she owned 8 houses or 8 homes, which is pretty impressive. And her investment properties bring in enough rental income to cover her living expenses. So I am very excited to welcome Paula Pant to the Old Dogs REI Network. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Well, I am very excited about this. This is great. And you have a great story. I thought maybe if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of moments and just tell us about Paula Pant and how you ended up where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. My first and only job was as a newspaper reporter. I worked for a very small paper in Colorado, and I graduated from college in 2005. I worked there for 3 years, and I quit that job in 2008. And since then, I have never had another employer since. So I have been unemployed for 10 years.
Wow. Like from Lois Lane to Supergirl here.
Exactly. So at the time that I quit my job, newspaper reporting is not a well-paid profession by most, for most people. And at the time that I quit my job in 2008, I was earning a salary of $31,000 per year. Now that was in 2008 dollars. So, you
Wow.
got to adjust for inflation there. And I realized that I could make more if I went and worked for myself. And so I began thinking entrepreneurially. I was not one of those people who was a born entrepreneur. I was not one of the little kids that was selling gumdrops on the playground. I was never initially, I was never wired that way, but I learned to think entrepreneurially during my time at the newspaper, as I started meeting other freelancers and as I started meeting people who are self-employed, and then I decided to make a go for it. So I quit my job in 2008, and I went and traveled for a couple of years. And in 2010, that was when I decided to make a really strong push towards entrepreneurship. So I came back to the United States after having traveled primarily in Southeast Asia from 2008 to 2010, and I came back to the U.S. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was living in a 3-bedroom. There were 5 of us. We were random people from Craigslist, 5 people living in a 3-bedroom apartment, all splitting the rent. So my personal share of the rent was $200 per month, because the rent for this whole 3-bedroom was $1,200, and then it got sliced up, according to different people and different bedroom sizes and stuff like that. Um, so I personally was paying $200 per month, and my boyfriend at the time, he was also paying $200 a month, and those were our living costs. So we were living very, very, very cheaply. And as we were living there, I realized that there was a building across the street. It was a triplex, and it was for sale. And in fact, it had been on the market for, I think, 16 months. We called the real estate agent, and it was under contract. And we told the agent, hey, keep our phone number as a backup just in case it falls out. And sure enough, that agent called us back a couple weeks later and said, you know what? It fell out of contract. Would you still like to make an offer?
Wow.
And so we bought the triplex with a down payment of $26,000, and it was myself and my then boyfriend. We bought it with a down payment of $26,000, and it's a triplex, so we rented out 2 of the units, and we moved our roommates in with us and lived in that 3rd unit. And by virtue of gathering rent from those other 2 units plus the rent that our roommates were paying, we were able to live for free. So we had no out-of-pocket housing costs. So instead of paying $200 a month for rent, now we were paying 0 for rent.
Oh, that's great. Becoming house hackers, huh?
Exactly.
So was it a 3-bedroom? Were they all 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms? How many bedrooms in each unit?
2 of the units were 1 bed, 1 bath. And then the unit that we moved into was initially a 2-bedroom, but we figured out how to convert the living room into a 3rd bedroom.
Wow. Interesting. And the funds that you had to purchase this, now you had mentioned you had quit and you went traveling. How did you travel and survive? And then how did you have the funds to be able to purchase this?
Sure. While I was traveling, I lived on a budget of $1,000 per month. And the biggest way that happened was I went to countries where the dollar exchange rate really worked in my favor. So I spent a lot of time in Laos, in Cambodia, in places where the US dollar stretches a lot further. I didn't move around very much. I would go to one place and just park myself there for a couple of months, because that way I wasn't paying for the cost of transiting. And I also wasn't I wasn't eating at restaurants or anything like that. I was eating local food. I was not drinking alcohol. I was, for the most part, not eating much meat, because vegetarian food is a lot cheaper. So in all of those ways, and of course, I didn't have any utility bills or anything like that. I didn't have any expenses back in the U.S. So on all of that, it's not that hard to live in Laos for $1,000 a month, $1,000 US a month.
And were you generating income while you were on the road, or were you just tapping into savings and to cover your expenses?
A little bit of both. I was generating just a little income, not much. I would write freelance articles here and there, but it wasn't much money by any means. I was mostly doing it in order to keep my skills fresh, keep my resume current, keep my contacts in the industry fresh. That, more so than the money, was the bigger benefit.
Got it. Okay, so you did that. You came back, and now are you already launching into a business now? You're living in this little triplex. Do you have something in mind at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, at that point, my thinking was no bigger than I wanted to protect myself from the possibility of having to go back into the 9-to-5 workforce. I wanted protection from having to do that. And uh, I I knew that the lower that I could get my own expenses, the less risk there was that I would fail at this whole entrepreneurship thing and have to go back to working for somebody else. And so that was really my thinking when we bought the triplex. I was just thinking, I wasn't thinking about becoming a real estate investor. I was thinking about how do I get my own personal housing costs to zero. That was the extent of my ambition at the time. I was not dreaming big by any stretch. So that's what we did. We got our own housing costs to nothing, and so you'd asked how we saved. Well, for two people who are both working full time, to save 26,000, so that's 13,000 per person over the course of a year and a half. I mean, that's a average savings of what, 700 a month, 800 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so you save it any way that you save $700 or $800 a month by living on less than what you make. And so again, my rent was $200 a month. I was driving a 15-year-old car. I was eating vegetarian food from Costco. My expenses were basically nothing.
That's great. Did you walk around in Costco, when they had the sample times, just
Yeah, eating the sample
you could
food.
load up, you can totally load up on that, just samples walking around Costco at certain times of the day. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I've done that, but yeah, no, I'm lying. Okay, I have done that, but it is fun. That's actually a fun place to go. Okay, so when you came back, were you just doing research at that point? Okay, what can I do to be able to be totally financially independent here?
No, not at all. I didn't even know about the concept of financial independence, and I
Oh,
wasn't thinking that big. All
oh,
I was thinking about was what can I do to not pay rent?
gotcha.
And the solution to not paying rent was buy a triplex, rent out two of the units, live in the third with roommates. And if I can do that, my own rent can be zero. So so I thought that would be the end of the story. I didn't expect to become a real estate investor. I didn't expect to become financially independent. And spoiler alert for people who are listening. So the way that it worked out, you fast forward to today, is that now, and I guess you alluded to this in the intro, now the rental properties pay all my bills. So last year, the rental properties grossed $125,000. And after all expenses, including mortgage, property management, uh, repairs, maintenance, capex, after all expenses, they netted 43,000. So, which I can easily live on. So, and which was in excess of the highest salary that I ever made.
Hmm.
Highest salary I ever made was 31. So that's kind of crazy
Pretty sweet. Yeah.
to have beaten my old salary in less than 10 years after quitting my job.
So, again, I'm pretty, kind of struggling a little bit here. Okay, you've got the free rent, okay, but you do have expenses, right? I mean, you've got to eat, you got to pay gas, insurance for your car, so there are expenses that you
Yeah.
need to generate. So where are you getting your money from, and how did that grow so that you could start investing more in real estate?
Oh, yeah. I would say that I don't have exact records, but I would estimate that my personal expenses were maybe around 1,500 to 2,000 a month. Because health insurance was maybe 300 a month or so, or like I think it was 200 a month back then. And food would be another 200 or 300 a month. And then my share of utilities split with roommates would be maybe another 100. And then cell phone would be maybe another 50 or 100. So yeah, I think all in all, it added up to about 1,500 to 2,000 a month was what I was living on, even without paying rent. So so yeah, that money had to come from somewhere, and it came from freelancing. So as I said, I was freelance writing while I was traveling a little bit, enough to keep my contacts fresh and enough to keep my relationships with editors going. And then when I came back to the U.S., started doing it full time. So I picked up gigs as a freelance writer, and it took about in the beginning, it was slow. It took about 18 months of doing that full time before I started making really good money at it. And by good money, I mean 5 figures per month. I didn't hit my first 5-figure month until a year and a half after I started doing it.
Oh, that's great. So you seem like you'd be very busy doing a lot of writing to ramp up to that, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of writing. It's funny, it's not just the article writing, it's the research and it's the going back and forth with editors by email. It's all of that. It's all the management around it. Takes a lot of time.
When did you discover that niche of personal finance? I mean, obviously you were very conscious of it. It sounds like from the get go, but you fell into this niche, and obviously your blog came out of somewhere too. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. When I decided to quit the newspaper and I decided to become a full-time freelance writer, I knew that I was going to have to specialize in some niche because if you just say, I'm a writer, no one's going to hire you. You have to niche down in order to get noticed by editors. But I didn't know what that niche was going to be. And I toyed with a lot of different ideas. I thought about, oh, should I be a wine writer? That could be kind of cool, right? I thought about a lot of different ideas. And somebody gave me the advice to write about what I love to read the most. And as weird as this may sound, ever since I was in high school, I've always loved reading Money Magazine. I loved reading Kiplinger. I read the book The Millionaire Next Door when I was in high school. I've loved reading about personal finance ever since I was a kid. And so it just made sense that if that's what I naturally gravitated towards reading, then that's what I should also specialize in writing about.
And it seems like too, from your approach, you're very conservative, at least in terms of your investments are concerned. From again what I've heard and researched on your real estate and so forth. But you also seem like you're very prudent with the amount of money you spend each month. I don't know if I'm gonna if I would accurately say you're a minimalist, but you seem like you definitely don't seem extravagant in the in what you're doing. I'm driving a 15-year-old car and that kind of thing.
Yeah, even now I'm a millionaire right now, and like I'm not saying that to brag, but my net worth is more than $1 million, and I still drive an 11-year-old Honda Civic.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love it. I love it. Someone that's that frugal, if I can use that term, if you're not offended by that, but in your frugality, were you sharing kind of the tips you were using on a regular basis, just to keep again to be able to sort of hold on more of your income as part of your your launching of your early personal finance writing and so forth?
That's a good question. I think in many ways within my writing, I was giving advice to a younger version of myself. And so when I started affordanything.com, I was 27, I believe, when I started that website. And so at that point, I was writing advice to the 20-year-old or 21-year-old version of myself. If I could go back and talk to myself 6 years ago, 7 years ago, what would I have said? I think I've continued to do that. I've continued to just write the advice that I would have wanted to have heard.
And to avoid some of the mistakes that you probably experienced doing it on your own, I would imagine too.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, for me, one of my biggest mistakes was not thinking big enough. I mean, as we've just talked about, I focused so much on the frugality side, so much on the saving side, that I wasn't really thinking about earning more. When I bought my first triplex, I wasn't thinking about passive income or financial independence or even investing. I was focused on downside protection rather than upside potential. And that is something that I write about a lot on Afford Anything is, think bigger, because ultimately there's what you earn and then there's what you spend, and then there's a gap between the two. That gap is what we refer to as savings, but savings can sometimes give the implication, the word savings sometimes gives the implication of cutting back, trimming, frugality. Really, when we talk about savings, we're talking about the gap between what we earn and what we spend. And there are two ways to increase that gap. You can either spend less or you can earn more, or you can do a combination of both. And so, you can't shrink your way to greatness. at a certain point, when you're already living with 5 roommates, driving a 15-year-old car, eating from Costco, there's not that much lower than you can go other than moving to Lao, right? There's not that much further that you could go. Um, so so what can you do next? Well, you can focus on earning more. And when I look back on my story, the the biggest, because I started from having a lower income, the biggest gains that I made came from increasing my income. Like as I said, I went from well, okay, at 31,000 a year, that's an income of what, 2,500 a month, and then after I started freelancing, my income went to more, it went into the 5-figure per month range. So I was topping $10,000 a month, right? When you 5x your income, but continue to live the same way that you did back when you were making 30,000, that's where that gap comes from. And then you take that and you use it to buy real estate, and wow. And you lather, rinse, repeat, and you keep buying more real estate, and then you have more gains from the real estate cash flow, and you put that into buying even more real estate or improving the real estate that you have, and you just continue to do that, and pretty soon you're a millionaire.
That's great. That's great. And that's, you're touching on a really important point that, we've addressed on this show before. And that is, especially for folks in the retirement years, so often, there's this just sometimes overwhelming, thing that happens when you're in that position. You have a fixed income, and so you're clipping coupons, you're trying to keep your costs down, you're thinking twice, should I buy this or not buy this, and it can be almost just a form of bondage to a certain degree, where you don't feel like, gosh, this isn't the retirement that I dreamed of. And that's a lot of what we talk about here is the fact that it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, I mean, it's smart to be a frugal person. I think it's a smart thing, because so often we just throw our money away on things that are just ridiculous. And whereas if you take that money and think of it as the asset that it is, that you can grow that money in so many different ways. Real estate is the one that we zero in on in this show, and obviously you've found in yourself. I think that that's a real key point, is that you can only cut things down, expenses to such a point, but you can increase the amount of funds you receive. Even if you have a pension and Social Security, why not add other avenues of income or cash flow? And I think that that's what you've been really good at, is that you've not only shown that in buying the real estate, but you're doing all these other gigs on the side, so to speak, and that are generating income for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that's awesome about being in retirement, one big advantage that people have in retirement, is that because you at least have that foundation, because you have that the fixed income baseline or floor line, any additional money that you make is you're not relying on it to buy groceries or to keep the lights on. You're not concerned that they're going to shut off the gas to your house in the middle of winter if you aren't able to make this money. And so that gives you the opportunity to experiment with really fun ways to make more. Like, you don't have to optimize for what's going to make me the most money, because I have to save and save and save and save so that I can cover my basic bills. You can start thinking creatively about, like, what do I really enjoy and how can I monetize that? Do I like working with animals? Like, would I want to be a dog walker on rover.com and walk people's dogs when they're at work? Like, I mean, anything like that, something that's fun, that provides a little bit extra money, but also is a good time.
That's great. That's great. And what's really interesting about your show too, and again, I really recommend people listen to it, affordanything.com, is that you do explore various ways that people can make money very easily without any, special training or abilities, and that there are options available that you can do things that you really love and continue doing that, but get paid for it. And that's what I really like. I mean, you could have stopped writing, but it sounds like you enjoy it. Also, you're very good at it. You could stop right now. You've got the income from your real estate, but you're still growing and you're still expanding, right? It looks like. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point is, zero in on what you love. Is there a way to monetize that, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and looking at your real estate investing, and this is very interesting to me. I have single family homes. I have multifamily. I'm more directed towards multifamily, but you've done it all with pretty much with single family. Now, I know you bought the triplex. Have you bought other small multis in that mix?
You know what's funny about that? I'm glad that you asked. I've almost every property that I've purchased, I have started that search by looking for small multifamily, and I've ended up with a single family home every time. So my real estate, so backing up a little bit, my approach when it comes to real estate investing is very simple. Uh, I do residential rental properties only. So I don't do commercial. I don't do, offices or warehouses. I don't do flips. I don't do tax liens. And it's not because I believe that any is better or worse, quote unquote, than any other one. I just know that my own mental bandwidth is limited. Like I can't be an expert in everything. So I just decided I was going to pick one thing and get really, really good at that one thing, and then just put blinders on to everything else. And develop mastery in a niche. And so for me, that was residential rental properties. And so every time that I've gone out, but I love the fact that with a multifamily, with a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, you can consolidate so much of that overhead, right? You've got one roof, you've got one building exterior, you've got one underlying piece of land that the property sits on. And so it makes a lot of economic sense in my estimation to own a small multifamily. And so every time I've gone out to look for an investment property, I've always looked for a multifamily. And somehow during the course of that search, I stumble upon a single family home that is such a ridiculously good deal that I can't pass it up. And so I end up buying that instead.
That's great. That's great. Well, there are some amazing deals out there, and it's hard when you come across them to not do something, to either move on it or tell somebody else about it. But that's true. With multis, I see what you see, which is the economies of scale that really make it work well for me. But then I also have single family homes out there too, and some that I don't even know that they're there because they're absolutely no problem. I never have to deal with them. I've got a great property management company watching them, and I don't have to deal with it. But do you invest only close to your home, or are you an out of state investor? Well, maybe you can share a little bit about how you've kind of. I know initially you lived in the property that you rented out, but maybe tell us about your journey there.
Sure, absolutely. So at the time that I bought my properties, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and all of my properties are in the metro Atlanta area. And about almost 3.5 years ago, I decided I've always wanted to live out west. The western half of the U.S. has always called to me, but I didn't grow up there. I'm not from there. But it was long a dream of mine to move out west somewhere. So about 3.5 years ago, I moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, and that's where I live now. I live 2,000 miles away from all of my properties. My properties are in Atlanta, and I'm in Las Vegas. And in fact, the next property that I buy, which is going to be hopefully sooner than later, is I'm looking at Birmingham for that next property purchase. Either Birmingham or Cincinnati, one of the two.
Interesting. Right now, one of the hottest markets is right where you're living.
I know.
I don't. Seriously, it is an amazing emerging market right now in Las Vegas, which is it's so funny you said Birmingham, because I thought you were going to say, yeah, it's down the street from me, because there are some amazing deals in Las Vegas right now.
Properties in Las Vegas went up 15.8% year over year.
Oh,
But the reason for that, in my view, is because we are lagging the recovery so much. Like those the double-digit gains were made possible because of the fact that we're still 5 years behind.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Yeah, Vegas went through quite a time during 2008. I mean, boom, man, talk about just one of the roughest markets. It really got hit hard, but it is very interesting. I think especially when you can invest out of state. One thing for me that I intentionally wanted to invest out of state because if I knew if I was too close to my properties, I'd be over there all the time. And that's not what I want to do. That's not what I want to do. I just want to generate the cash flow. And so for me, it worked out real well. Plus I'm in Southern California, so I couldn't buy what I can buy in other states as I can here in Southern California. But it is a different type of investing because now you're managing a property manager, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let me just kind of ask you a little bit here. Because you have taken this journey and expanded out into other states and in other emerging markets, it sounds like Birmingham's definitely one that's doing some great stuff right now. What would you say is sort of your biggest mistake in that process that you sort of learned the hard way?
I would say my biggest mistake was thinking small. I've often just made mistakes of thinking small. And so when I first began investing in properties, I made the classic BS mathematical mistake, that creative accounting mistake of thinking that if I did the work, then I could increase the profits because I would pay myself zero. So in my head, I would think, well, if I make this repair, then the cost of that repair is zero. If I handle this renovation myself, I'm the person holding the drill or holding the hammer, then that means that it costs only materials and there's no labor cost. And that means the profits go up. That was the way that I was thinking about it. And that was a wrong way to think about it.
Yeah,
Big time.
definitely.
And that's a big part of what I teach right now on Afford Anything is, I'm rolling out a course next year on rental property investing. And I repeat that so often during the course because it's a mistake that I made, that you cannot price your own time at zero, price somebody else's time at greater than zero, and refer to that as fair. Like when you're running the numbers, when you're analyzing a property and you're running the numbers, run it in an identity agnostic way. Math must always be identity agnostic. Otherwise, it's not math.
That's great. That's great. Great way to look at it. For myself, I'm one of these guys that has to bang his head against the wall 15 times. I keep thinking I can do plumbing, and every time I do it, I have to pay somebody 4 times what I spent on this thing, and probably 4 times more than if I would have hired a plumber in the first place to repair what I messed up. So sometimes it's you can save money, but your time is worth something too, and you have to kind of look at that. Is my time better spent in an area that can be focused on generating additional cash flow, or am I better off going in and unclogging toilets and trying to fix fences and do things like that?
Absolutely. Plus, there's a difference between hiring out for a rental property versus hiring out on your own personal residence. Because with a rental property, every day that property is not in service, every day that it's vacant because you're doing a renovation is a day that you're missing out on rent, right? So there's a real opportunity cost in terms of lost income that you don't face when it's your own personal home. So
great point.
That really makes it creates an even greater urgency to treat your business like a business. You can make your plumbing mistakes on your own personal toilet if that's what you really want to do, but treat your business like a business.
Great advice. Conversely, what would you say your biggest success has been in your real estate investing efforts?
I'm tempted to say unlearning that.
Not doing that any longer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Oh, geez. So yeah, I will say that it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer, but I will stick to it. There's truth in humor,
Uh-huh.
and I think also what I said earlier about just sticking to one niche and one strategy. So the strategy of rentals and the niche of residential. Again, not that I think that those are quote unquote better, but it can be very tempting when you first, especially for me, when I first started real estate investing, I was very tempted to, I was excited about this whole new world that I'd stumbled into. And so it was easy for me to think like, oh, well, then I can also flip houses and maybe I can buy some tax liens and maybe, like I hear about
Exactly.
all these different opportunities.
Shiny object syndrome.
Exactly. Big time shiny object syndrome. And it was so tempting to just go chasing everything and be like, all right, well, now that I've got my first rental property under my belt, now I'm going to move on to flipping. And after flipping, I'm going to move on to something else. And
Right.
then I'm going to be part of a syndicate. And then like,
No, I mean, I'm looking at a bookshelf full of home study courses on pretty much everything from wholesaling to flipping to liens to deeds. I mean, you name it. I have been through a course of one type or another. But one thing I think you said that I think is really important. I'm going to try and sell you on this, but basically you said you thought too small. You're in a different frame of mind now. You're thinking bigger, and I have to think of a friend of mine and somebody I know. Joe Fairless. Okay, Joe Fairless, when he decided to go into apartment investing, he started with a 165 unit apartment in Cincinnati. He just jumped into it. He got a master lease. He didn't even have to, do a syndication to buy this thing. But, that's what I tell people. I say, don't be afraid because there's more doors there. It's pretty much the same process. I mean, unless you're getting into syndication, but just buying a 10 unit or a 12 unit is really not any different than buying a single family home for the most part. There are some differing elements in terms of financing and some other issues, but basically it's the same thing. And thinking bigger sometimes can save you a lot. You could buy a 10 unit apartment building and it'd be the same as buying 10 single family homes in terms of income and in the overall result. That's one thing I really agree with you. I think people should be afraid to think big.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So maybe your next one will be an apartment. We'll see. But just, just kidding. Okay, so our audience, is 50 plusers. These are people that are either approaching retirement. Okay, so they're in maybe the last 5-10 years in their job, W-2 job, and they're getting ready to retire, or they're already retired. But there's a commonality shared with those groups of people that some are concerned that they're maybe not going to have enough when they do finally retire to be able to do the things that they want to do in their retirement. And then there are those that are there that are realizing, gee, this pension, this nest egg I have isn't really cutting it in terms of what we want to do. And some of the things that we really zero in on sometimes here is just, have you ever had that situation where you want to go see somebody, maybe a good friend or even a family member, and they're on the other side of the country and you're thinking, wow, the cost of the airfare, I mean, you shouldn't have to think about that. It shouldn't have to be an issue. But there are some people that live very tight and so that's an issue for them. So what I'm asking is from your experience, and not just in real estate too, but if you were in that position, here you are, you're approaching it, you're not really sure, what would your advice be to somebody in that? Maybe you're talking to your own parents or grandparents or what have you that may be facing this. What kind of advice would you give?
If you're approaching retirement and your finances are tighter than you would like.
Or you're in retirement. You could pick either or. You're already in retirement and it's just really tight and you're not able to do a lot of the things that you hoped you could do in your retirement.
Number one, earn more. And I would earn more through, find some work that you enjoy, something that is meaningful and fun, ideally something uh, that has a social component to it so that you're around other people, and you know something with flexibility. I mean, like I said, and it doesn't have to be a what your career was in. Um, it can be something that's completely random. As long as you enjoy it and it pays money, that's and it's safe. Like that's what matters, right? So I gave the example of um, signing up on Rover.com to be a dog walker, right? The reason that
I've never
example
heard
came
of
to
rover.com before. This is great. No, this is good. People are going to hear this. This is
Oh,
neat.
so the reason that example popped into my head is because I was just out of town for a month. I had to go to a couple of conferences, and then I went to London and Edinburgh, and then I came back and went to this other event. So I had to be gone from home for a total of a month, and I needed a cat sitter, and I didn't know how to hire one. And so, of all things, I went to this dog walking website, and I started flipping through people's profile pictures until I saw a profile photo of a person that included a cat. And then I reached out to that person and said, "Hey, look, I know this is a dog walking website, but are you available for cat sitting?"
That is so funny. You made me think of this. People look like their dogs, I mean, people,
Yeah.
it's just kind of something. Do you look for people that look like the dog you want them to take care of? No, never mind. Okay, I was totally off the wall. But anyway, that's what I mean. They have their pictures there. Okay, I'm going, wow, that's really funny. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So yeah, so that's how that happened. And then I met this cat sitter, and I could tell she loves what she does. Like, she clearly loves animals, and she hangs out with animals all day. And she doesn't make a huge amount of money, but she'll make, by doing that, maybe an extra $75 a day or something like that.
Sweet.
Um,
That's nothing wrong with that. That's great.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So that would be my number one tip: is find something that you enjoy that can pay you. Make more money, because you can only frugal down so much, and once you've frugaled enough, then it's time to focus. Remember, it's all about that gap. You can earn more or you can spend less. And once you have mastered the spending less side of the equation, remember, that's only half the equation. Now it's time to earn more. The thing that I would not do is I would not take on an inappropriate level of risk within your investments in order to try to make up for lost time. Do not do that, as tempting as that can be.
Very good point. And how do you see real estate investing in that risk realm?
Well, if you're in retirement, okay, this is going to be controversial, so you can send your angry letters to uh, Bill at
Yeah, right.
olddogsreinetwork.com.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Paula. Okay. It's gonna be like a Susie Orman thing. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Private joke. No.
Uh,
Okay.
for, for anybody who's listening who's wondering what that is a reference to, please go to the Afford Anything podcast and search for the Susie Orman episode, and your life will never be the same.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to beat your train of thought there. Okay. Hopefully you forgot about this really controversial thing. No, go ahead.
So this is going to be controversial, but if you're in retirement or you're close to retirement, I would advocate, if possible, making real estate investments in all cash. I would not want to be taking out debt at 50 plus. Even though you can't grow as fast or go as far or whatever, there's all people in the real estate industry often um, are very quick to defend leverage. And I understand all of the arguments. I understand the argument about arbitrage. You borrow at X and you know, earn a return of Y, and the spread between the two is that arbitrage. I get that. But leverage is a lever. It can push you up very quickly, or it can bear you down just as quickly. And when you are in your 20s or 30s, if I go broke at 35, I've got the rest of my life to recover. Um, if something happens that makes me go broke at 60 or 65, that's going to be a lot harder. And so I would manage risk. I would mitigate that risk by buying investments in cash or with as strong of a cash position as possible.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, the problem so many of us have is, and I had a guy on, a great guy, 56, he started investing in real estate. And his dilemma, it was kind of like, Robert Kiyosaki and Dave Ramsey are duking it out in his head, because, there's the one guy totally get debt free, and then there's the other guy that says, no, that's good debt. It's okay, And so, there is that sort of dilemma, that, I mean, one of the great things about real estate is you can leverage, but the other part of it, like you mentioned, you also have to have time to recover from that. Now, if you're going to buy in emerging markets and your homes are going to double in value every year, it's a different situation. But we're also approaching I believe we're approaching another market correction that could change things pretty radically there. And if you're the one that's heavily leveraged, those are the people that get hit the hardest. So I think there's definitely wisdom to that. Although, if somebody's in their 50s, they've probably got another 20 years of good investing time there, where they're still going to be pretty fresh. But at the same time, leverage can be your best friend or your worst enemy. I agree with you. I think that's, if you can do cash, more power to you. So just to clarify, we were talking about, you've got that person that's got that nest egg. Mm-hmm. Taking money out of the nest egg, if you take money out of that nest egg to buy a property in cash, mm-hmm. You think that's a good investment?
I do. To buy a property in cash, like you're talking about selling off, say, index funds, for example, to buy a property in cash.
Yeah, could be index funds, could be, just a regular market. It could be, it could be money market account, it could be anything. Mm-hmm. It could just be, I'm talking about, your investment money that's sitting there that's got to last you through your retirement. So if you take away from your nest egg, you are going to lose some income that amount of money would have generated. But, it is going to go to real estate, which is going to generate, I think, probably better than most investments out there.
Yeah, I wouldn't frame that as taking money out of your nest egg. Essentially, you are moving money from bucket A to bucket B. So you're moving money, if bucket A is some combination of savings accounts, money market accounts, index funds, stock market, if money A, or if bucket A is that world of, more conventional vehicles for how people typically store retirement money, and bucket B is owning a home outright that you use as an income generating home, then other than the transaction costs, such as the closing costs, you haven't actually lost any money. You're simply transferring from one form to another.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, in fact, a little known, I don't know if this is a secret or not, but this is an interesting strategy that a lot of old dogs I know use. And you can take out of your IRA, let's say it's a self-directed IRA. You can start doing distributions out of there after you're 59 and a half. But you can continue to add to that as well. And so you don't have to the mandatory withdrawal age is 70 and a half, right? I think it's still 70 and a half.
RMD, 70 and a half.
Yeah. So you can still operate within a self-directed IRA and have the tax advantages there at the same time that's growing that nest egg. And the self-directed IRA could be in all kinds of things, right? It can still be in index funds and what have you, but you have the advantage of being able to invest within there and access it as you need to draw down, so to speak, from your nest egg. Yeah, so I think that's good advice, doing cash. I personally think that's a great way to go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. The people who I saw who did very well during the Great Recession I knew these investors based in Colorado during the crazy heydays of 2004, 2005, 2006. They made a lot of money investing in real estate, and they were uh, naturally pretty debt averse people. They were very much in that Dave Ramsey school of thought.
Right.
And so they leveraged hard initially to get into all these properties because they saw the run up happening very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so they leveraged hard. They got into I don't know how many, maybe we'll say 40 properties. And then because the real estate values were growing so quickly, they sold half of their holdings and used the gains from that to pay off the other half. So then they ended up with this basket of about 20 properties, free and clear. And that's what they had going into the recession. So then going into the recession, the properties that they had, yes, those properties lost half of their value. The equity got cut in half, but they they didn't, I won't say they didn't care, but like they were fine because they held those properties free and clear.
Yeah, that's wise. That's one of the things that I think people should be thinking of if this recession hits, as some predict, 18, 24 months, whatever. Yeah, nobody really knows. But, is to have cash available too, to take advantage of that. Because if properties are going to be cut in half again, I mean, you want to jump all over that if you can. So if you're leveraged too heavy, you're not going to be able to do that. I think that there's definitely a wisdom to that. Good point.
Yeah. And I would also say for people who are listening, if you must borrow the smallest possible amount and pay it off as fast as possible.
Yeah, great point. And there's seniors out there too that are house hacking right now, and you wouldn't think that that's the case, but they're already downsizing. They got rid of their big house. All the kids are gone, and so instead of jumping into a condo or something of that nature, they have chosen to do a house hack, get an FHA loan for 3% down or something like that, and you'll be able to leverage that to grow their portfolios too, which it's also a smart approach, I think.
That's excellent. And the thing about house hacking is that you can also do it if you want to remain autonomous in your living situation. You can also do it by getting a single family home that has a carriage house or a mother-in-law suite, or a guest house in the back. You can do it like that. And then you can, depending on what you want, you can either live in the larger or the smaller of those two homes and rent out the other one.
Great point. Yeah, good stuff. Time is zipping by, but I want the people listening to know that you're a very active speaker. You have another company called Catalyst, a content marketing firm that you have. You write for multiple major publications, things like Forbes and Fortune and Money, and on and on. You're in a lot of places and you're doing a lot of different things, and have accomplished quite a bit in your relatively young age here. What is your goal looking ahead? What is the thing that really excites you about your company or companies here, and where you're going in the next 10, 20 years?
Oh, Catalyst is a blast from the past. I shut down Catalyst about 2 years ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did, yeah. So that was a content marketing firm that I had. As I continued to grow as a freelance writer, a lot of my clients started asking for not just the articles, but for like the total content management and marketing package. So they didn't just want to assign me articles and have me write them. They wanted me to plan out the editorial calendar and plan the corresponding social media posts and
Oh, wow.
and then do all of the analysis, like run all of the analytics and make recommendations for improvements. And so that was the inception of that content marketing. That was really how I ended up making, to circle this back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, that was a big piece of how I ended up making very good money as a freelance writer, was that writing grew beyond just writing into full service content management and marketing. And that was how I was able to make such good money. And so I was doing that for a number of years. That was the income from that was a big piece of what fueled my real estate investments. But I shut that down a couple of years ago because I realized that I could either focus on that or I could focus on Afford Anything, the blog, the podcast, the course that we're building. I'm building a course on rental property investing. I could focus on one or the other, but I couldn't do both simultaneously. And Afford Anything was much more exciting to me. So I decided, even though I had this very, very successful content marketing firm, I decided to shut it down. It wasn't really big enough that I could sell it, or at least I don't think it was. So I just closed up shop so that I could focus on Afford Anything. And I guess that really leads to a bit of a baked in lesson here, which is sometimes you have to be willing to let go of the good to make room for the great.
That's great. So what do you see ahead in your business endeavors in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, next year we're launching a course called Your First Rental Property for beginner rental property investors. And that plus buying properties and continuing to run Afford Anything, the podcast and the blog are my focuses. So that's what I see myself doing indefinitely.
And you're going to continue to grow your real estate portfolio as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm eyeing either Birmingham or Cincinnati as my next target.
Yeah, both great areas, both some excellent opportunities. Neat. Well, we are at the sort of the tail end here of our interview. Hey, old dogs. I don't know if you're like me, but it's easy to get overwhelmed trying to manage and track multiple properties, juggling multiple bank accounts, and trying to determine just how much money we're actually making each month. Normally, I spend a lot of time manually inputting and updating my various spreadsheets to just keep track of everything. Well, we have a new sponsor here at the Old Dogs REI Network, and they must have been listening to this show because it looks like they've developed a solution just for me. I'm talking about a new company called Stessa. Stessa lets real estate investors automate the busy work so we can focus more on the things we love, like growing our portfolios and spending time with our families. To set it up is very easy. All you do is just take a few minutes to add your properties and link your accounts, and your income and expenses will update automatically. And what's really cool is that you can see all your properties and key performance metrics in one central dashboard. To learn more and get started with a free account, go to stessa.com/dog, of course spelled D-A-W-G. That's Stessa, STESSA.com/dog. Wrap it up session. I just asked you a series of quick questions and you kind of share some resources that have been valuable to you. So if you are ready, we will go ahead and wrap it up.
Awesome. That sounds great.
All right, cool. Well, how about your favorite real estate book?
It's a book called From Zero to 130 Properties in 3.5 Years. And it was written by an Australian real estate investor. So if you read it, please disregard all information in there that's about taxes or laws, unless you live in Australia. But read it for the high-level thinking around how to buy rental properties. That was the first book that I ever read about rental property investing, and it opened my eyes to how to think like an investor, which was very valuable.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. How about your favorite just general business book?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Great book.
Amazing book. It taught me the concept of circle of influence, which is a concept that has served me very well.
That's great. How about your most valuable website for success, of course, other than your own?
I don't know if this fits neatly into the for success category, but I really enjoy the website Wait But Why. So the title is like, Wait, but why? And each article is an in-depth exploration of some aspect of society. It could be artificial intelligence or colonizing Mars or Neuralink, a wide cross-section of topics. Along with that theme of thinking about how to think, I really believe, and this might sound strange, I believe that site has helped me become a better thinker. And I guess that is ultimately what the best writing does. It doesn't just give you information, it helps you expand the way in which you frame questions.
I like that. I like that. That's great. It's the first time anyone has mentioned that. So that's going to be a great resource up there that, of course, all of our listeners can access through our show notes. That's what I'm going to check out for sure. It sounds great. Sounds great.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's addictive. If you start reading it, like clear your whole schedule, you're doing nothing else that day. You're not going to be able to stop reading it.
Binging on the website here.
Exactly.
Well, how about your favorite app?
Well, I have an addiction to Instagram, of course.
Sure.
If you're on there, I'm at Paula Pant, and Twitter. So those are, of course, the social media apps. Facebook, I don't really. I'm on Facebook, but it's not my favorite. Instagram and Twitter.
What's your best one for business?
Well, I mean, for me, for what I do, because I'm a blogger and a podcaster, Instagram and Twitter, because that's how I interact with my community, my audience.
Gotcha.
Specifically for real estate investing, geez, I don't think I use any real estate investing apps. No, I mean, I use banking apps to look at my own personal finances, but I don't actually use any apps specifically for real estate investing.
How about your favorite quote?
There's a quote from a play. I don't remember what play it's from, but the quote is, "Life is pretty easy if you just relax."
Oh, that's great. That's great. I like that. Yeah. Why get stressed, For those of us old dogs, we've had that, especially if we were in the corporate world. Okay, here we go. This is the sort of our big question here. If, you absolutely lost everything that you have financially, I mean, all your assets, everything, and all you have is $1,000 in cash, what would you do with that $1,000 to rebuild what you had lost?
So, do I have a home and a car?
I know people always see, I knew you'd be one of those detail people, if you listen to her show, she's into the details. Okay. It's one of those general questions, but okay. You have, you don't have a home, but you have a car. Okay. How's that?
Okay. Do I have a laptop?
No.
Okay. Well, that's where my 1,000 is going. I'd spend that 1,000 on a laptop.
There you go. And you'd write yourself back to probably where you are now. I mean, that's great. I love it. Okay, well, how about here's a question that I think all of our listeners are going to want to know is, how can people get a hold of you, find out about you and all the cool stuff that you're doing?
Check out the Afford Anything podcast. So we're on any major podcast player, whatever it is that you use to listen to podcasts, you'll find us. So podcast is called Afford Anything. The website is affordanything.com. And those are the two best places to find me.
Oh, very cool. And and hopefully, do you have anything posted yet on that real estate course that you're going to be doing, or is it still preliminary?
So if you go to affordanything.com/VIP list, you can sign up for email updates and we have a free 7-day series about rental property investing, like an in-depth series about, kind of the rental property investing 101 that you'll get for free if you go to affordanything.com/VIP list.
Gotcha. Good stuff. And there is a ton of content on your site. I have to say, I talk about going and losing yourself, and I mean not only the podcasts but the articles, and then you have resources. I mean there's like a lot of stuff there. So if you go and visit, prepare yourself, because there's just a lot of good information. I love all the personal finance stuff, and then there's also just a lot of the real estate information as well. So good place to go. And if you're one who likes to save money, we didn't really go into this, but there's a lot of our investors that have become minimalists, so to speak, maybe not the most extreme type, but those that have just really simplified their life by just getting rid of a lot of the stuff and really just, focusing on the areas that really matter and so forth. And you do have some real good tips for those that want to save money too, which is great. I think you have some real good resources there and some good articles on that.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoy it. It's a good website.
It's cool, and it's a very cool podcast too. And she doesn't talk. Really, it's not all real estate. In fact, it's just a part of it. But all of it's, I think, finance related, or just anything that for people that are maybe looking for additional income, looking at ways to reduce the expenses that they have, looking for other opportunities and things of that nature. It's a lot of good stuff there. But real estate happens to be part of it. The stuff that you've talked about and shared in that regard is also real valuable for those old dogs who are interested in real estate investing. Wow, Paula, thank you so much for being on. I think
absolutely.
This is gonna be great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me on. This was a very fun conversation.
Yeah. Hey, it's a fun show here. Our guests are probably going to wonder why she's not howling. Okay. I'm not going to give you a hard time on that. Okay. Okay. She got a pass. Okay. And so we're just going to let it go at that. I didn't forget it, or we didn't edit it out. Okay. So thank you again. I encourage everybody listening to check out affordanything.com. And thank you again, Paula. I also want to thank all our old dog listeners out there too for joining us today. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to join us means a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. Please note, everything we talked about here can be accessed in our overly extensive, detailed show notes on the Old Dogs website at olddogsreinetwork.com/blog, and look for the episode with Paula Pant. You'll be able to click to her site. You'll be able to get references to the books. You can click on the books and the apps and all the stuff that we also reference at the end as well. So that is the show for today. Remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward, and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dogs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.